Hey, this is a compilation of the creepypasta narration videos I made recently. Skip here if you don't care. I started narrating this type of scary stories because I wanted to practice my pronunciation, to get used to speaking into a microphone and all that. I liked listening to creepypastas, so this was the perfect type of stories to narrate myself. I plan to do 20 plus minutes videos where I narrate one or more spooky stories, and when I have around 2 hours of content, I will compile all of them into a big video. Then maybe when I have 6 and 12 hours respectively. It depends on how long do I want to narrate them. Because my only goal is to be more fluent in English, so I wouldn't need to have a script if I want to talk about some not so important but I want to talk about stuff, like my Linux and Windows developed videos. But that's all from me for now. If you stuck with me until now, thanks for listening to my explanation. Even if you skip the intro, I still appreciate you for wanting to listen to the rest of my video. Don't take it. It's a miracle and a glory and the greatest thing to ever happen, so they say, and it'll probably become the law soon that you have to take it. They'll have you swallow a little capsule when you're still a baby, probably at the same time you're getting your inoculations. The base of the thing in there weighs only a few grams and will be plucked out of a little pool that will probably be installed in every hospital soon. Those couple grams are more than enough for it to happen. Sure, you'll never get cancer. You'll live until 150. You'll have stronger bones and a more resilient immune system. You'll probably never need glasses or a hearing aid. If you lose something small like a finger, in half a year you'll have it back. If you lose a whole arm, in 2 years you'll have it back with nearly full functionality. It's the sort of miracle that's believable enough to catch on. It won't solve all our problems, and it will even create a few more. Like overpopulation, like we never saw coming. But it works, and it's cheap, and it's plentiful, and that's all we need. Sure, they can't quite explain how the thing actually manages to rewrite our genetic code after we swallow a few grams, but they promise the answer will come someday, and that there are no ill side effects. It's from a previously unknown variety of starfish, but they won't even tell you that on the news. I think the story right now is that it's something they're grown artificially. These starfish live in the deepest, darkest places in the ocean, and they aren't very big or interesting looking. Honestly, we've probably seen them down there before 1,000 times and looked them over. It just so happened that prick with a show about eating weird foods got a hold of one, God knows how, and thought it was a different kind of starfish and ate part of it, and a year later he had that food he lost back. I'm sure they tore apart his house and tested gallons of his blood and interrogated everyone he ever spoke to. But somehow they figured out just when the regeneration happened and eventually found the fucking thing. It had been alive where he ate one of its arms, and I guess he took pity on it and let the thing live in a tank in his house. Well, this led to that, and eventually they brought up a ton of the suckers. But here's the thing. Think about our technology and innovations. Think about what they're for. Mostly it's to keep us alive longer, make us healthier, help us communicate better. What if as a race we'd already had the ability to communicate via thought? What if we were naturally incredibly hardy and long-lived? What if we started out having everything we needed without having to do a bit of work? Our goals would turn to keeping our world the way it was and simply enjoying things. With a mind so powerful it can transmit and receive thoughts with no effort. It stands to reason other amazing things are possible too. With that mind staying completely intact in even the smallest silver of the creature, one has to wonder just what else that mind can do. So now here's the question. If you'd survived all this time just sitting on the bottom of the ocean with this incredible intellect, how would you amuse yourself? What if that mind could wander and roam freely, if it could just find something to carry it? What if, as a race, we made ourselves the bottom of the food chain just to ensure we'd constantly be taken into new creatures and be allowed to see the world through their eyes? It is really such a leap to think that such powerful minds could overtake smaller, lesser ones. No, nor it is unnatural to think that if such a race of powerful minds was endangered, they would use this ability to dominate other minds and defend themselves, that they'd patiently wait until their enemies devoured them, then simply displace the minds of those enemies and solve the conflict. I don't think it's crazy at all, and I don't think it's crazy that there is suddenly a lot more war all over the world. A lot of research put into birth control and the accidental release of that super bug that makes men sterile. We should be enjoying world peace, but instead we're killing each other faster than ever before. Maybe they're not even threatened. Maybe we're just a game to them. Maybe we're the 100 rays of being these things have done this to. All I know is that they don't turn you into some zombie from a cheesy old sci-fi flick. They let you think you are still in control, that what they want you to do is actually what you want to do. It all seems so natural, so right. Then we are in World War III, and the only thing the bombs won't scorch clean is the floor of the ocean. Don't ask me how I know all of this, and don't take that pill. To Brie Ice Cube. Subject: Brie, please read this. Brie, don't delete this. I know you hate me, but we were best friends once and I need you to read this. I think I'm in serious trouble and there's nothing you can do, but I need you to read this so that you understand. I know we haven't talked since sectionals. It's been forever, but what happened to you wasn't my fault. At least it wasn't entirely my fault. I know everyone thinks it was, but I would never do anything to hurt you. This is going to sound crazy, but I need to tell you so that someone knows. It started when we were in the 8th grade. It was the night before the Crystal Classic competition. I was at home and couldn't sleep because I was so nervous about competing. Well, I got on the computer, just sort of surfing the web and stuff, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was just sitting there, so I googled myself. I never should have done that, Brie. At first, it was just the usual stuff you find when you Google yourself. Then I found a link to a Wikipedia page about me. I thought our club or my dad made it or something. There wasn't much there, just some basic facts about skating and what city I lived in. But the thing that got me was that it said that I won that year's Crystal Classic. I laughed. I thought for sure someone had only made it to encourage me. I confronted my dad about it, but he denied it. When I won the competition the next day, I was so happy. That was the first competition I had ever won, and it felt so good. Remember how hard I worked after that? That was when my parents hired Sergey to coach me. You know how much that must have cost. After that, I would check my page before every competition, and it would always say where I placed. It said I would win the regionals at 15, and that came true. Afterwards, Sergey convinced my mom and dad that I had a real shot at the Olympics. That was when they pulled me from school. I skated every day, but I just wasn't progressing the way Sergey said I needed to if I wanted a shot at the championship. I was working so hard and skating well, but still Sergey said it wasn't good enough. When the sectionals came, all I could think about was winning, so I did something I shouldn't have. Everyone was saying that we were the favorite and I felt like I had already lost the competition. So I made a Wikipedia account and tried to update my page to say that I was the winner. The thing is that after I tried to update the page, I checked it and all it said was, Annora Petrova is a selfish little bitch who is going to get what she deserves. I broke down. That's why I looked so awful the next day. I was in a daze. I remember watching your routine and seeing your blade snap. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground and my face was covered in blood from where the tip flew off and sliced my forehead. Then they told me it was my fault because I had your skates in my possession earlier. Brie, I honestly didn't do anything to your skates. I wanted to win, but I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. When they told me I was banned from any further competitions, everyone said I got what I deserved. Nobody even asked for my side of the story. I guess you heard that Sergey dropped me after that too. He said that I ruined him. No one would talk to me. Do you know what's like to be ostracized by everyone? I couldn't even get the ice time. And then the page got worse. Anytime I checked, it would say all of these horrible things about me. I can't even tell you half of them. The language was so vile. I'd cry every time I read it, but I couldn't stop checking it. I knew I had to do something, so I made a complaint to Wikipedia. I even tried calling them, but no one there claimed to know anything about the page. I was home alone that Friday night when I decided to check to see if it had been taken down. The page was still there, though only this time it said, Annora Petrova is a pathetic little orphan. I freaked. I kept calling my parents to warn them, but every time I did, all I would hear was this horrible laughter on the other end. I must have called them 100 times until I couldn't take the sound of the laughing anymore. After the accident, the police gave me their phones and there wasn't any record of my calls that night. I was devastated. Before that, I was so busy training all day and doing homeschool, I never realized just how alone I had been the whole time. I know you tried to reach out, but I was so depressed and angry that I just shut everything out. Once I turned 18 and got the settlement money from the court, I came to Switzerland. I got to reinvent myself. My skating really took off. It hasn't even been a year and I still feel like everything that happened was so long ago. That's why I shouldn't have done it free. I'm writing you now from an old hotel outside Paraguay. I'm auditioning for the ice circus tomorrow. I know it's the kind of thing we used to make fun of, but I really want this. I was feeling really nervous, so out of an old habit, I checked my page. It's so hard to say this, but when I read it to see if I'd get the job tomorrow, all it was said was, Annora Petrova died friendless and alone, and it has today's date listed as the date of my death. I'm sobbing so hard I can barely type this, but I wanted you to know the truth. Please believe me, Brie. I attached a screenshot of the page. It's all there, just as I told you. I don't know what to do. I don't know anyone here and nobody speaks English. I keep refreshing the page. God, it's been forever. I keep refreshing, but it still hasn't changed. I'm waiting for midnight. I don't know what to do, so I locked myself in my room. There's only a few minutes to midnight now. All I can do is refresh the page. I'm exhausted, but I can't stop. I'm afraid to leave the computer until I know what happens next. In the fall of 1987, local news channel WSB-TV2 of Atlanta, Georgia was attempting to fill a scheduling gap in their Sunday morning lineup. After a few solicitations by local business owners, they decided to allow the young Reverend Marley Satch to take the available hour block to do a religious-themed show. It premiered October 18th with little promotion. The show was standard religious fare and consisted of the Reverend sitting in a simple chair reading passages from the Bible to the camera and discussing their interpretation and significance to our modern day-to-day life. The show received a reasonable number of views and continued to be shown into early December. It was then that the studio began to receive extremely strange complaints from the viewers of Words of Light with the Rev. Marley Satch. The calls were from women and women only, who vaguely referred to uncomfortable feelings they had at very specific intervals during the program. They described feelings of nausea, back pain, dizziness, and blurred vision. These callers, for no discernible reason, were convinced that it was the viewing of the program that was causing these symptoms. It was later determined after 3 weeks of complaints that these feelings were happening at roughly 12-minute intervals during the course of the program. The small studio staff checked all recording equipment, both audio and video, and found nothing faulty. When the Reverend was made aware of this incident, he merely shrugged and stated cryptically that someone can't handle the voice of God. The head of the studio, at a loss to explain the cause of these complaints, decided to continue running the program. By February, viewership had dropped sharply, and it was decided to pull the plug on the show. The studio had figured it would be more prudent to spend as much time as possible on the news story that had the other 2 local news networks abuzz, the miscarriage epidemic. Starting sometime in November, the number of healthy pregnant women miscarrying in Atlanta metropolitan area had reached over 300. The CDC could find no discerned cause for this terrifying occurrence. The Reverend took the show's cancellation with what could only be described as abject indifference. When informed, he made no protest, merely nodded almost knowingly. He left the studio after the last episode was filmed without so much as a word and dropped off the face of the earth. No one ever heard from him again, not his former congregation, nor any member of the church. The studio moved on, filling the slot with an infomercial, and continued to concentrate on the miscarriage story. A year and a half later, an intern at WSB Studios discovered the tapes of the Word of Light and began going through them in an attempt to find stock footage for an upcoming piece the station was doing on the impact religion had on the city. The Atlanta incident, as the miscarriage epidemic became known in medical journals, petered out 3 months after the studio cancelled Reverend Satch's show and had already begun to fade from the public consciousness. As the intern went through the tapes, he accidentally made a disturbing discovery about the footage. While attempting to stop one recording at 10 minutes and 45 seconds, he mistakenly jammed the fast-forward button down. While the footage whistled by, he attempted to pry the button with a screwdriver. Just as he succeeded, the tape stopped at 32 minutes and 1 second. The intern actually fell out of his chair when he looked at what was frozen on the screen. The image of a badly decomposed severed head filling up the entire frame. After he collected himself, he moved the film back a few frames, then forward, and realized that his mind was not playing tricks on him. He began going through the rest of the recording and soon discovered that at exactly 12-minute intervals the image would appear for one frame. Thinking it was some practical joke being played on the new guy, he presented it to one of the film technicians ready to be mocked. The technician was just as puzzled as him. No one had touched the footage since the cancellation of the show. After the studio had closed for the night, the intern convinced the tech to help him go through all the tapes of the World of Light. They discovered that every single episode had the same horrifying anomaly. They also realized that as the show progressed, the image had become more disturbing as maggots began to eat away at the loose flesh and pieces of hair and skin seemed to fall off exponentially. The tech made clear to the intern that what they were seeing was technically impossible, since the film itself showed absolutely no sign of splicing, and he himself had been at every filming of the show and knew of no time when this image could have been inserted into the frame. All of this was presented to the studio head, who, fearing some kind of backlash over allowing this to get on the air, ordered all the tapes destroyed. He told the intern and tech that he had no interest of knowing who did it at this point, only that covering their collective asses is all that's important now. He demanded that they mention this to no one. The tech easily moved on, remembering the incident as a darkly funny personal anecdote, but the intern wouldn't let it go. He made copies of as many tapes as he could before they were wiped, and took them to see if he could find anything else in them that might point to who did this or why they would. A week later, he attempted to rope the tech into helping him again, saying that he believed he had discovered something even more disturbing than the images themselves. When the single frames were edited together in chronological order, the head's mouth appeared to be moving, as if trying to form words. The tech, fearing for his job, told him to get rid of the copies and not talk about it again. A week later, police responded to a 911 call made by an elderly woman in one of the Atlanta suburbs at dusk. She had heard horrible noises coming from her next-door neighbor's house, where a young couple lived. She told the emergency responder that the wife was pregnant and that she was terrified that something had happened. When the officers arrived at the scene 20 minutes later, they found no lights on in the windows and the front door ajar. They moved in slowly and made their way into the living room. Inside, they found a young woman dead with her abdomen slashed open. The wound was jagged and a trail of blood led from the body to the couch on the far end of the room. There sat her husband, the studio intern, naked, the corpse of his unborn child at his feet dying. In his hand, he held a rusty piece of metal siding he had used to gut his pregnant wife. The television was on and playing an 18-second loop of silent footage of a decomposing head mouthing some unintelligible words. The story at the police precinct to this day goes that the intern kept saying under his breath over and over again as they led him away, "The light of God calls them." I sleep with my window closed now, not out of habit, out of fear. There are monsters in the world, real ones, serial killers, rapists, the kind of things we can name and look up. But the supernatural, that's different. It's older, quieter, easier to keep secret. It hides in the crack we pretend aren't there, just outside the corner of your eye, or curled up inside a dream you'll never remember. Ghosts, demons, vampires, we treat them like stories, but I don't think they ever were. I never really been a skeptic. I was raised to keep an open mind about people, about the world, and everything in between. Still, the supernatural was always a bit of fun to me. I had a good job for a couple of years, boring, no passion involved, but the money was nice. I had a beautiful fiancée too. Her name was Michelle. This journey of life is a funny thing. It has a strange way of not spoiling you. Like if too many good things happen, the universe needs to correct this imbalance. Joy as a debt to be paid. Michelle had complained about her car making odd noises for a couple of weeks, and she kept insisting she'd get it fixed eventually. One night my debt was paid in full. 3 years ago she was driving home to me. We just had an argument over the phone, nothing serious. As she was driving at a high speed on the motorway, her car had a wheel bearing failure. The report said she tried to brake. She lost control, hit a tree, and she died. They said it happened so fast she didn't feel a thing. They said she likely didn't experience any fear, as if that was supposed to comfort me. The irony is that Michelle lost both her parents in a car crash around 7 years prior. She was in the back seat, but by some miracle she made it out with just a broken collarbone. I wouldn't really call it lucky. This is a tragedy that had come back to claim her, the one that got away. Her family came from Ireland and she had no relatives in the country. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles even came to the funeral. It was just me, my family, and some of her close friends. She was loved. I hope she knew that. Her absent family meant that I had to identify her body. I'll never forget that day for as long as I live. Walking into the icy sterile room was the most painful experience of my life. I've had tragedy before. My father passed when I was very young. Cancer. But nothing could compare to the biblical levels of agony I felt that day. Grief. Real grief. It isn't just a feeling. It's an affliction. The way it manifests is physical. You feel it in every pulsing throb. Your body mechanically churns it through your system. It radiates from you, infecting others. You feel it in the nerves. Deep, inescapable. No refuge can be found in booze or medication. It feeds and grows until it cannot be contained in the flesh any longer. Then it manifests outside of your suffering in one way or another. It changes you. I entered the room with a coroner's hand on my shoulder. I didn't know what to expect. I just wanted to see her face one last time, under a sickly white light on a cold steel table. Impressive in its shine, lay a pale blue sheet draped over the figure of a woman, my woman, the love of my life. Are you ready, Paul? The coroner's voice, a low, raspy breath. His face sagged and stiff by years of death and mourning. I need to see her, I cried. I need to see my wife. My breath shallow and weak. I wasn't ready. The sheet was ripped back, violently revealing what my beautiful Michelle had become. Her jaw smashed open, her eyes absent yet demanding my gaze. My fiancée, limbs twisted and deformed, gore engulfed what was once pure and angelic. Her wet black hair now a mess of tendrils and cobwebs. She looked inhuman. The sight of her seared into my brain like an infection. No one to blame except myself. If I had pushed her a bit more, maybe she would have gotten it fixed and would be married by now. Maybe we'd have the kids we always talked about. Such a simple thing. That's not how things went. I've since learned there is nothing much to gain from thinking about what could have been, regardless of the pathetic piece of comfort that fantasy brings to me. She's gone. I have to accept that. After Michelle died, I completely unraveled. My job didn't last long after she passed. We were together for 9 years, and for those 9 years we were joined at the hip, soulmates in the truest sense of the word. My twin flare. I don't have anyone in my life anymore. I've become a shut-in. Even just the sight of other people sends nauseating waves through my body, a sickening pulse compelling me to retreat from human interaction. I neglected those relationships and they were right to abandon me. I don't blame them. They tried to pull me out of this pit I've dug for myself. But they have lives to live, and I have nothing to offer anyone anymore. I just bide my time until I can see her again. I live with my mother now. She's been amazing. I don't see her much though. As a retired woman, she travels a lot with my stepdad. I think they are in Italy right now. I sleep in a tiny box room on the second floor. Just enough space for a single bed pushed up against the radiator and a small locker for some clothes. Just above the bed, the window. Outside my window is the front garden. 20 feet from the house is the road. Across from that, a row of houses identical to mine. The road below is warm, soaked in a haze of orange streetlights, illuminating the way for the occasional passing stray. Just over a month ago, I was laying on my bed, room nice and cool, bathing in the depressive light from my phone. Something loud passed by my window. It was the sound of a car, except something was wrong. It sounded like it was dying, a deep mechanical groan. I looked out my window. Nothing. I shrugged and passed it off as a neighbor just driving by. Then I heard it again, and again, and again. Every so often, an hour, 20 minutes, I kept hearing it night after night. I tried to catch a pic, but when I looked, it was just my plain old empty street. No car. Hearing this sound sent me spiraling into a brutal frustration, a visceral attack of emotions I couldn't control. Like I was trapped in some machine, completely at the mercy of whatever mental torture was destined for me, self-inflicted or otherwise. I couldn't stop seeing her face, not how she looked in life, but in death. The morgue, crushed, twisted, a mask of pain, where beauty used to live. A face that screamed with no sound. That's not how I wanted to remember her. The walls of my room covered with her pictures. Her eyes follow me. She watches me sleep, following the strange sounds of a damaged car that didn't seem to exist. I kept having these dreams. Horrible, vivid dreams. The kind that trick your brain into believing they are real. I'd be shopping, then look down and see the store tiles fall away from me as I sway from a rope tied tightly around my neck. Dreams of falling, burning, drowning, dying. The worst ones were of her. In dreams I'd see her, standing on the edge of total darkness, close enough to know it's her, but shrouded in enough deep shadow that I couldn't make out any of the horrific details. She'd extend her arms and reach for me, but I was always had to look away. I prayed and prayed I could fall asleep and just dream of her before. Instead, my nightly routine was to be tortured by visions of her death, visions of what remained after the accident. This went on for weeks. I never thought about suicide until she died. I was that kind of asshole to see someone as weak for ending it. I now find myself considering it on a weekly basis. After weeks of miserable sleep, I sat at a dinner table for hours just thinking about her, about our life together, about what could be different. God, I miss her. I decided that I can't keep living like this. I had to actively try to get better. I love her, I always will. Maybe it will never get easier and maybe I'm not supposed to move on, but there was happiness I thought I could find. Moments of joy in between the decades of despair that wait for me. I was wrong. After I got into bed, window open, I heard someone walking past my house. It was around 2 a.m. Saturday. Drunk people coming home. I hear voices, people talking, laughing, footsteps. I've heard these sounds 1,000 times. This time, the steps didn't sound normal. They came in a strange rhythm. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, like a child hopping down the street in the dark, heavier. Then they stopped, right outside. My mind caught this before I did, like it was so used to the regular sounds of passerby, and this one just stood out. I paused my phone to listen. I was sure it was right outside. I was sure I could hear something. A voice, a whisper, nothing I could distinguish from the wind. I sat there for 30 minutes, just listening. I almost jumped out of my bed when I heard a woman's voice, loud as hell, coming from down the street. Her voice shattered the silence like a shotgun in a church. It was my neighbor laughing at her boyfriend as they stumbled home from a night of drinking. At least they have each other. I laughed and called myself an idiot, laying down to fall asleep, and I swear I heard someone jump into a full sprint, steps wide and heavy. Then a strange, sweet smell lingered after. More drunks, I figured. I listened as the steps trailed off, becoming echoes. The next day, I had almost forgotten about the strange sounds until I decided to walk to the shops, out of my front door, through my garden and around the wooden fence. I felt something, a smell, something familiar, sweet and overpowering. Honestly, I didn't know what it was, but it made my mind conjure images of the past, like a dirty window I could hardly see through. On the ground, something caught my eye. Light reflecting on silver reminded me of the table where I'd last seen her. It was a ring. I recognized it immediately. It was identical to my ring, the one I wore on my finger every day since I asked Michelle to be my wife. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it was here. Confused and disoriented, I spun my head around the estate like I was being watched by ghosts. A neighbor working his garden waved at me. I didn't react. I just turned around, walked back inside, and closed the door. I kept her engagement ring in my hand all day. Later that night, same as every night, in bed, bathed in the loathsome glow of Reddit or some other shitty website, I heard it again. This time it was around 1 a.m, hopping up the street. The sound of shoes crunching on stones, a strange wet splat accompanying each odd step. Again, just like last time. It stopped right outside my window. I just listened. Something about the sound got under my skin. I was almost afraid to look. I fought back against the oppressive emotion as I reached for the curtain, just to pull it open, before I heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, a whisper, soft yet sounded like it was coming from all around me. The sound resonating in my body. Then it stopped. My skin began to tighten. By the time the initial confusion had passed, I began trying to rationalize the situation. Surely it was just a neighbor talking to someone. I forced a smile and lay back down, closed my eyes. Then it spoke again. Hey, Paul. The words fell out of the whisperer's mouth and came and went like raindrops, gentle, like silk. My face and body tensed at the sound of my own name. The words were soft. You could almost miss it. Let me in, Paul. Then all was silent, and I never heard them leave. I didn't get much sleep that night, or any night after, to be honest. The following day I felt crippling fatigue, as if my body was lacking the means to carry my own weight. Forcing myself to do some chores around the house wasn't easy. I was perfectly content to let everything fall apart, sit down, drink, and rot. As I was doing my tasks, walking around the house, passing windows, I was frequently distracted. Any sign of movement outside pulled me away from what I was doing, like a hidden hand. It's strange. I half expected to see her walking in the driveway of my mother's home to visit me. She never did. The day carried on as normal, misery. As I was laying in my bed later that night, staring at the impossible ring now hanging from a hook on my wall, I heard the sound again. That strange hopping sound, wet, heavy. It was approaching from down the street, louder and louder with each step until its climax was right outside. I heard a slow, long, deep breath. Then it spoke to me. I need to come inside. Open the curtain. Paul, please, let me inside. Paul, please, I just need to see you. Open the curtain. Paul, please, it's me. I need to come inside. Open the curtain. It was her. A strange smell permeated the room, sweat and overpowering. I know it's impossible. Michelle is dead. I identified her body. I was at her funeral. I knew she was dead. Yet she spoke. I didn't answer. I just cried. She spoke for hours, just repeating herself. The love of my life, mangled, buried and dead, calling to me from the night right outside my bedroom window. I wished I had the courage to look. What would I see? Some kid playing a sick joke on me. Some kind of monster using her voice. My beautiful wife to be the way she was in the morgue. I just lay there, scared and crying, until the sun came up and with it the voice drifted away, like she was a radio losing signal. It took me hours to finally sit up and get out of bed. I didn't look out the window. Every pane of glass injected fear into my veins, peripheral being tensed at the corners of my eyes, footsteps behind me coming from nothing or none. I closed all the curtains on every window of the house. It stayed that way for days. The neighbor who had waved at me called over. He said he was just checking on me. He obviously saw the curtains drawn for a while and grew concerned. I know I looked insane. I hadn't really slept in weeks. The dreams were too much. Not like my nightly visitor would let me get much sleep anyway. I told him I was okay. I knew he didn't believe me. His face recoiled on itself, like he smelled something awful. I didn't care. I closed the door on him. The next night I was terrified. I thought maybe if I sleep early I'll just sleep through it and it will be like it never happened. So that's what I did. Or should I say I tried to do. I don't know what woke me up. Maybe another horrible nightmare. I couldn't remember. I jumped up in a cold sweat. I could immediately smell her perfume. There was no doubt now, that's what I was smelling. I could hear her outside my window, whispering loudly. It took a moment for the sounds to involve words. Paul, I need to come in. It's me. Open the curtain, Paul. Paul, please, it's me. I love you. Let me in. I love you. I love you. Let me come in, please. I know you found my ring. I felt my room shrink, closing in around like suffocating darkness. Each word sending me deeper and deeper into the depth of despair. I couldn't take it anymore. Go away, I screamed into a coward's yell. Paul, you have to let me in, so we can be together. Paul, it's me, please. Don't leave me out here. We can be together. My heart bounced at my ribs as the rage clawed at my throat. I wanted to scream and cry and throw up all at once. You're not Michelle. Fuck off. Just open the curtain, you'll see. It's me, Paul. I love you. The voice changed its tone. It sounded enhanced by my response. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, watching the curtain as it fluttered in the breeze. And she whispered for hours. It wasn't begging anymore. It was softer now, confident, almost soothing, like she knew I was listening. I know you want to see me, Paul. I know you're tired. I could make the pain stop. I miss you. Please, Paul, let me come in. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just listened. And then she said something I'll never forget. You're already halfway gone. You just need a little push. I swear to God, I heard a smile in her voice when she said it. Then her laugh, her beautiful laugh, it echoed for hours. I sleep with my window closed now. No more breeze, no more sound, no more Michelle. Still, she comes. Muffled through the grass, I can hear her, tapping at my windows. I live with my curtains drawn. Day or night, it's all the same to me now. She hasn't stopped. Her temptations are constant. I haven't eaten, haven't slept in days. I don't think my body even wants to anymore. She tells me I've suffered enough. That peace is just on the other side of the curtain. Just take a peek. She says that I was never meant to stay here without her. I still hear her, whispering my name, whispering things. Sometimes she says stuff I don't understand, like she's speaking in a way that doesn't fit inside a mouth. But then she comes back to Michelle, back to I love you, back to let me in. Her ring is always in my hand. The tapping of my window persists. Every window, deadly, delicate, too slow to be impatient. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking to the curtain, but I'm there now. Her perfume wraps around my throat like a noose. The same scent she wore the first night we said forever. I reach for the curtain. My hand is trembling, like it's trying to pull itself back. She's whispering, Paul, please, you miss me. I'm cold. You were never supposed to see what was left of me. I freeze. The room groans and tilts like a sinking ship. My name keeps spilling from her mouth like it's stuck in her teeth. Paul, 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 Paul. I pull the curtain open. I'm not afraid. She's there, standing on the edge of total darkness, beneath the glow of the orange streetlight. It flickers behind her. Her eyes are full though she hasn't blinked once. Her hair is falling across her face like it used to. And she's wearing the black hoodie she stole from me the day we moved in together. She looks alive, warm, real, not broken, not dead, not buried. She raises her hands to reach for me. This time I don't look away. Her fingers are too long. She smiles at me, her eyes grow wider and she says, there you are. Her mouth doesn't move. I unlock the window. I let her in. A hand gently rests on my shoulder. She's home. I walk alone on these narrow, lonely roads, my feet kicking explosions that only I can hear. I'm covered in a blanket of darkness, but it doesn't bother me that much. The moon hovers directly above my head. Even tonight it shines no visible light. I always know where the full moon is. Who am I? I'm that evil, sinister thing you hide from under your blanket every night. I'm what makes the trees blow in the wind and twigs snap when you're alone in the forest at night. I hover gently above your head during a good campfire story. I'm sorry, I find that one of the few pleasures I have left is my imagination. But admit it, I gave you the chills for a moment there, didn't I? In reality, I'm just a simple old man whose insomnia has taken a turn for the worse in recent months. I live alone in a small house out in the countryside, where the narrow roads never end. All my sons and daughters have long ago moved off to the big cities, where people live in cramped little compartments and can never get away from one another. I found that on long cold nights where sleep is impossible, walking provides at least a small comfort. The roads are pitch black, but my eyesight has always been razor sharp despite my age. It often amuses me to imagine myself as some kind of demonic creature prowling the roads and running evil. Despite this, I'm still an old man, and often even the smallest reserves of energy are hard to find, and every step can cause small throbs of pain in my legs. My breath is often more of a wheeze. But despite all this, I continue onward, not knowing what I will find, and the trees surround and tower above me, entrapping me in my own imagination. I trudge along until I come across an old twisted iron fence which surrounds a field filled with strange dilapidated buildings standing all awkwardly and out of pace with one another, stacked 4 or 5 floors high, and somehow the darkness emanating from inside the hollow windows is darker than the blackness that surrounds me. The paint is peeling off like a mad skin disease. Overlooking the entire site is an old watchtower standing on 4 rusty legs and threatens to collapse at any moment. The entire scene is so startling that I nearly turn around and head back home, but then I remember the game that I have been playing with myself the entire way here. I am that dark, hairy thing that crawls around in places so murky you would cringe at the sight. My footsteps shriek and rip your eardrums apart. Old abandoned places like these are exactly where I belong. So I walk along the fence until I find a small tear in the links and crawl through. The grass is cool and damp from a recent rainstorm and rustles softly beneath my feet. I walk around the strange compound, exploring aimlessly, touching the decaying walls and standing directly under the watchtower, gazing up at the metal underbelly. I make my way over to the far side of the compound, where a red shack stands alone, supported by black cinder blocks. I see a bright light shining from the window. Intrigued, I head over, and I slowly begin to make out faint speech coming from inside. We can hit the north side, but we won't have enough merchandise for the rest of the town until Lenny gets back next week, says a quiet but based whisper, like a ghost in a hurry. But that leaves out Leor's place. He and his gang are going to be mighty pissed. Drug dealers. Don't worry, everything's planned out. We only have to fake a delay for a few more weeks. Then we'll finally have enough money to pick up and leave all of this behind us. So you keep saying. Without warning, my stomach turns around 180 degrees and ties itself into a knot. The pain is almost unbearable. I hunch over and clutch my chest. My body seems shut down and I can barely move. A wheeze escapes me and explodes into the night. Instantly, the conversation inside drops dead and one of the men swears. Every inch of me swears against movement, but I force myself up and run back the way I came. I barely make it 10 agonizing steps before I hear the wreck of a door slam open and footsteps bounding down the small stairs. I force myself to run faster, my lungs begging me to stop. Somehow I make it to the watchtower before the man reaches me, and I collapse at its base. A ladder stretches to the top of the tower. I get up and raise my foot and plant it on the first rank. It creaks in protest, but holds. The man is close behind me, so I climb upward toward the creeping, beckoning night sky. By the time I reach the top, he's halfway up the ladder. It is now that I begin to see the corner that I have backed myself into. I can't understand why I chose to climb the tower. I remember a strange voice in my head whispering that it would be a good idea to climb the ladder, that everything would be okay once I reached the top. A fist slams into the side of my head and sends me spinning to the floor. Before I can even think, my attacker is on me and kicking at my sides. I try desperately to defend myself, but he is too wild and untamed. As he continues his assault, I see his face clearly for the first time. I don't see fury in his eye. Instead, I see desperation. As if he is pleading for a way out of this. As if I'm the one ripping him apart. His kicks get harder, and I get the sense I am being vitally damaged. A strange numbness spreads over my body. His face starts to blur, and the pain is floating away. I feel as if I am falling asleep, but I can hear a door knocking in the distance. Go away, I'll get it later. I'm tired now. I want to go to sleep. I'll get back to you later, okay? I'm that blank sheet that wraps you in your darkness. I'm the last thing you see when your life flashes before your eyes and you drift into the great beyond. I'm what breathes inside your heart and carries your misery to the worst places. I awake suddenly, my vision razor sharp. The man is still continuing his assault on my body, but the pain is gone, vanished without a trace, replaced with a strange sensation that I've never felt before. In a single fluid motion, I stand up and grab hold of him. And then, with a strength that I never knew I possessed, pick him up and throw him clear of the tower. His scream is horrible and filled with terror. It takes several seconds that feel like an eternity for him to hit the ground and split into countless broken pieces, silencing his scream forever. All the energy drains out of me, replaced by a sense of inner peace. I feel better than I have in years. I slowly crawl down the ladder, walk back through the hole in the fence, and start walking on the long, lonely road that will take me back home, where I know I will finally get a good night's sleep. A few years back, I worked as a nurse in the geriatric unit of the hospital in my hometown. There was one old woman there with pale blue eyes whose mind was still fantastically sharp, and her desire to socialize and make new friends set her apart from most others living in that wing of the facility. That woman and I soon became close for this reason. Her name was Yana, and I still miss her every day since she passed. The strangest thing about Yana was not her accent, which I could only place vaguely as Eastern European, nor her disinclination to talk about her past, which means I never learned exactly where she had grown up. No, what fascinated me the most was that a strange young man, badly mutilated and plainly blind and mute, would visit her every single day. His hands appeared deformed, seemingly eroded at each digit down to the first knuckle. But each evening, a little after dinner time, he would visit and they would sit together. She would read to him or sometimes sing in her frail old voice. Sometimes they would just hold hands in silence. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask her about this man, and in a strange moment of openness, she agreed to tell me the story. My sister and I were the only surviving members of our family after our father passed away in 1968. These were very hard times for my old country, and father had grown so sick that we were eventually forced to allow him to starve rather than waste food to comfort him as he inevitably died. Sister had been losing her mind little by little before all of this happened, but I could see in her eyes as we buried father that she had finally gone somewhere far away inside herself. I remember the crows, perched in thick groups like clouds of preening black movement, watching us in the cemetery from all of the rooftops. We moved to bury father quickly because the crows were as hungry as we were. Sister took to begging in the streets, sometimes trading sacks for rides into the city nearby in the hopes that her begging would be more profitable there. It was during these terrible times that she convinced a son, a bastard whose father was not known to her, but who was certainly some manner of predatory monster. This was the only kind of man my sister knew in those days of her life. The child was delivered healthy, happy, and with a growing spirit that broke my heart because I knew that soon the young boy's eyes would look like mine and like my sister's. Even on the day he was born, I knew his beautiful, joyful innocence could not last. Sister did not care for her son as she should have, as God and goddesses alike demand that a mother should care for her child. She would not change the boy's soiled diapers, leaving these to me instead, and would forget to feed him even when his hungry wailing was ringing shrill and miserable through the whole house. Eventually she began to take him out begging, using the child as a prop with which to elicit the sympathy of strangers. She was most pleased when he looked his worst, and even complained to me once or twice that she could raise no money at all on the days that he looked too healthy. I can never forget her final act of cruelty against Vasily. I named him myself after sister could not be bothered. It was morning, and I had walked outside into our yard to smell the air. The child was lying motionless on the ground there and seemed quite dead, smeared as he was with his own blood. His fingers and toes were black with frostbite. Sister had not even bundled him in anything when she laid him down hours ago in the dark of night. The crows, which were as hungry as we were, had plucked his beautiful eyes and tongue from his still living body. I grabbed him up with tears already pouring down my cheeks, thinking that I had claimed the corpse. It was only when he stirred against my breast that I realized he might be saved. I swaddled him as warmly as I could and fed him something before rushing down to the home of the town's only doctor. I nearly beat down the front door with my fist, and he answered with sleep still in his eyes because it was so early. I paid him with all of the heirloom jewelry from mother that I had been able to hide from sister over the years. An hour or so later, the doctor told me Vasily would live, but asked that he be allowed to monitor the child for the rest of the day. I told him that this would be fine, as today would be a busy day for me. And indeed it was. By evening I had smashed sister's head to a flattened pole with the cast iron skillet from our stove, obtained a train ticket for passage out of our home country, and made plans to give Vasily the best life he could still yet have. Vasily, my son now, knows nothing about any of this, of course. I told him only that he was adopted away from a situation which he was likely not to survive. The mirthful optimism I saw on his face when he was born survives to this day inside his heart. Sister, in all her malice, had only managed to suppress it for a while, and now, almost 50 years later, he still visits his elderly mother every single day. She beamed with pride as she finished her story and would say no more. And she was right. Vasily loved her so much and wore no resentment on his face for his injuries. He always seemed to be smiling pleasantly even though, in his blindness, he often didn't know anyone was looking. He visited her every day until she died, and he was holding her hand when she passed. I knew from his interactions with hospital staff that he understood spoken English, and so at Yana's funeral I told him that I had been a friend of his mother's. I told him that she was the most amazing, wonderful woman I had ever met. His sad, grateful smile grew deeper, and he nodded his head. His response came in sign language. She was. I was working on grinding up some meat for my lasagna, humming to myself. It was going to be a nice dinner. The meat was Mexican meat this time. I used African American the other night. It wasn't to my liking at all. The man I took the meat from was an older man. No wonder the meat didn't taste good. This time I selected a handsome young Mexican to get my meat from. I had a thing for symmetry, and I made sure to have both his right arm and right leg used for my lasagna. I had made cheese from my mother's breast milk that I had collected last night. That's all I wanted from her. After I collected the milk, I let her go. Oh, how it smelled delicious already. I made sure to put a lot of Italian seasoning in the water for the noodles to boil in. I'm starving and the smell is such a tease. I set the meat in a sausage pan, grabbing the homemade tomato sauce I made all the time. But there's a twist. Human blood is in it. Only a bit, and you can barely taste the iron. I put some seasoning in the meat sauce, letting it cook on a low simmer. My stomach growled and I was getting impatient. I got out some chopped up leg from my freezer, eating it raw. An hour later the noodles and meat sauce was done. I got out the pan I was going to use, layering the noodles, meat and cheese. I covered it with tin foil, setting it in the oven. I let it cook for a while, as I did some cleaning around the house. I looked in the basement, seeing the older man and the younger one. Dinner will be ready soon, boys. I hope you're hungry. I knew they'd be able to get around. I did make some prosthetic limbs to help them get around. You're a twisted man, the older man said as he glared at me. I smirked a bit, knowing what he said was true. I closed the basement door, checking on the lasagna. I starved them for the past 3 days, so they would have no choice but to dine with me and drink some wine. Once the lasagna was done, I had them come up to dine with me and drink. It was a silent dinner, we didn't talk much. The lasagna was exquisite, and I loved every bit. The Mexican was scarfing it down and drinking his wine quickly. The older man took his time. It was obvious he wasn't happy. Why do you look so upset, old man? Do you not like your dinner? He didn't say anything for a bit, but he soon threw his fork at me. You're a terrible man. Can I speak with you in the back room, please? I got up and I walked to the back room with him as he followed. I knocked him out quickly, knowing exactly what I would make my next meal out of as I strapped him down. This truly was the perfect meal. Don't worry, it will be over soon. 13 days ago, I walked to the park. It was a bright sunny day. There wasn't a cloud in sight. The weather seemed to reflect my mood. The birds chirped with joy. People walked past and smiled. The grass was green and the sky was blue. It was a good day, a perfect day. I smiled and hummed a joyful tune. I took in a deep breath. This will never end. Don't worry, it will be over soon. Does it have to? I've been having such a good time. You know the rules. 14 days ago, I walked to the local park. It was a bright sunny day. There were a few clouds around. The weather seemed to reflect my mood. The birds chirped with joy. People walked past and nodded. The grass was green and the sky was blue. It was an okay day, a nice day. I smiled and hummed the tune. I took in a deep breath. This might never end. Don't worry, it will all be over soon. Why, today's been a good day. You know the rules. 15 days ago, I walked through a nearby park. It was a dull, grey day. There were loads of clouds around. The weather seemed to reflect my mood. The birds did not chirp. People walked past and did not even look. The grass was green and the sky was grey. It was a gloomy day, a boring day. I hummed a slow tune. I took in a deep breath. I hope this ends. Don't worry, it will all be over soon. Thank you. Today was not as good. You're welcome. 16 days ago, I walked to a park. It was a dull, dark day. There were only clouds in sight. The weather seemed to reflect my mood. The birds were not seen. People avoided me. The grass was green and the sky was grey. It was a gloomy day, a melancholy day. I did not hum a tune. I did not take in a deep breath. Please make this end. Don't worry, it will all be over soon. Thank you so much. Today was a dark, sad day. You don't need to thank me. 17 days ago, I walked. It was a dull, depressing day. There were only clouds. The weather seemed to reflect my mood. There were no birds. There were no people. The grass was grey and the sky was black. It was a gloomy day, a depressing day. I did not hum a tune. I did not take a deep breath. This has to end. Don't worry, it will all be over soon. What do you mean by that? The day will be over? Yes, number 5. Who is number 5? Why, it's you. But that's not my name. Then what is your name? It's, there, that's your name. Why is that my name? Hush now, child. It will all be over soon. Who are you? You already know. What am I? Number 5. Number 5 of what? You are just number 5. Time to wake up, sleepyhead. Who is she? She wants to take you away. Resist her. Why does she want to take me away? Dale? Dale, what's wrong? You are special, number 5. She wants to take you away. Who is Dale? Why is she calling me that? Dale, please, resist it. What is she telling me to resist? Do it, number 5. But I don't know who she is. Do it. Dale grabbed his alarm clock and smashed it over his mother's head. He ran downstairs into the kitchen and opened one of the drawers. His mother chased him downstairs to try and stop him. Dale picked up a knife and stabbed her. He watched the blood run in between the tiles. He proceeded to make himself breakfast and get ready for school. Bye, Mom, he called out before getting on the bus. I woke up in a dark forest. I could feel a warm liquid running down the back of my head. I reached the arm around my head only to find out there was a massive bump on it. Further inspection led me to believe that I had been knocked out for a couple of hours now. I slowly started to drift my head off the cold, hard ground and I eventually got up. I stumbled my way through the foggy forest and I eventually came across a silhouette of what appeared to be an old, broken down house. I contemplated whether I should enter the house and look for help or if I should just turn around and look somewhere else. Thinking that this might be the only house that I stumble upon, I walked toward the old, crooked home. When I got to the doorstep, I noticed that the door was all boarded up. I tried to grip one of the boards to rip it off, but it didn't budge. Exhausted, I walked around the house, hoping to find a back door or even an open window that I could crawl through. The only open window I came upon was on the second floor, and there was no way I was getting up there. I couldn't help but notice that there was a shed behind the house and that the door wasn't boarded up. I turned the rusty doorknob and the door gently creaked open. Laying on the floor, I found an old crowbar which had a thin layer of dust on it. I walked back to the front of the house and attempted to pry the door open. Eventually the door opened up just enough for me to slither through the open space. Total darkness surrounded me as I reached for my pocket and pulled out a lighter. I turned on my lighter and a small orange light made it just bright enough to see. I noticed that all the furniture looked very old and had a lot of dust on it. The house probably hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. I scanned the walls of the room to try and find the light switch, only to find nothing. I headed down the hallway on my right and I found 3 rooms. I slowly entered the first room and I felt a cold current of air blow past me. The room I was in looked like a girl's room. The walls were a sickening shade of pink and there were what seemed to be ripped up dolls and teddy bears littering the wooden floor. On the other side of the room, there was a small wooden desk with what looked like a small red notebook that someone had left open. I walked towards the desk and picked the small notebook up. I flipped through a couple of pages, but it was all written in German. I noticed that the further into the notebook I went, the sloppier and worse the handwriting got. I tried to skip all the way to the end, but all I found were ripped up pages and what looked like bloodstains. There was no doubt that I was genuinely creeped out, so I quickly got out of the room and proceeded to explore the rest of the house. I walked out into the hallway and saw a door on my right. I tried opening the door, but it was locked, so I figured maybe I could kick it down. I took a running start and broke down the door on my first try. Behind it there was a staircase heading down into the basement. I slowly walked down the stairs, trying to avoid the pieces of glass that littered it. Eventually I made it to the bottom, where it was nearly pitch black. I pulled out my light and turned it on again. There was red writing on the wall, which read, "Leave now." Suddenly, I hear a loud crash upstairs. I ran quickly upstairs and found the body of a teenage girl laying in the living room I was just in. I stood in front of her, horrified and unable to move. I heard footsteps behind me, and I was confronted by what I could only describe as a shadow man. He looked at me with his red, soulless eye. "What are you doing here?" I fell backwards onto my hands, nearly hitting my head against the wall. The shadow man stood still and looked at me for a couple of seconds. I swiftly got up and started running to the door, almost tripping on the dead girl in the process. I exited the house and started running as fast as I possibly could. I could feel the blood rushing through my whole body. I looked behind me to see if the creature was still chasing me. But as I turned my head to look behind me, I felt something hit me in the back of the head. I woke up in a dark forest. I could feel a warm liquid running down the back of my head. I reached my arm around my head only to find a massive bump there. I slowly got up and started stumbling my way through the foggy forest. I was confronted by an old, broken down house. I decided to enter the crooked home. Henry finished unpacking the final box into the kitchen of the new house that he and his 8-year-old son, Jacob, had moved into. He could not afford his old house, so he found the cheapest one on the market. It was old and ran down. It was the kind of place you'd imagine an alcoholic like him would live in. It had few rooms, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a basement. The exterior walls might have been blue once, but were now black with rot and mold. It was hardly a place for an 8-year-old to be in, but Henry's wife left him long ago. Obviously, Jacob was unhappy with the move, so Henry decided to go check on him. Henry went to the bedroom, which was unbelievably small, with one window and two beds miraculously crammed in. "Hey Jacob, how are you?" Jacob did not reply. Instead, he looked down at his teddy bear named Mr. Joey. "Would you like some water?" No reply from the young boy. "Well, how about you, Mr. Joey? Do you want to have a tea party? That sounds fun, right?" Henry said, ruffling the teddy bear's head. "Daddy," said Jacob, looking up at Henry with his big brown eyes. "Why did Mommy have to go?" "Because, son, she just had to," Henry said, not knowing what else to say. Henry went into the kitchen to make some dinner, which was half a box of mac and cheese. They sat at the table for a while without saying anything. Finally, Jacob spoke up. "Daddy, when do I go to school here?" "Jacob, sweetie, we can't go to school here." "Why not? Why can't we do anything?" "Jacob, lower your voice. I didn't even want to come to this stupid place. I hate it here. I hate you." That night, Harry drank enough beer to give alcohol poisoning to 3 grown men, at the least. Depressed about what his son said, he cracked open another can. After a couple of hours of sulking on the couch, he grabbed some of the empty cans to take down to the basement. He dumped them into a trash can at the bottom of the stairs. A glass bottle missed the can and shattered as it hit the floor. Shit! He tried to pick up the broken pieces, lost his balance and flopped to the floor with a grunt. Face against the concrete, he was looking at a rectangular shape covered by cloth. He painfully stumbled to his feet and took the cloth off the shape. It was a mirror. He took it to the bathroom and hung it on a wall where it might have been once. He felt better when he looked into it. Maybe the father in the mirror was a better one than him. He reached out to the reflection of himself. Suddenly, Harry found himself standing in the kitchen. Something seemed different though. The walls were moving, breathing even. Colors would change, although almost imperceptibly, and he had an odd feeling of uneasiness. There were very few details changed from that of reality. It was like an abstract version of the world he knew. He started feeling a bit queasy, like being in this place made him sick. He walked around. When he opened the bedroom door, he saw one of the beds was on the side of the wall. The window was no longer square, but triangular. He closed the door and went down into the basement. It was a dark, horrible room. The darkness of the shadows consumed it. What little you could see of the walls were sipping red liquid through the cracks. There were 4 figures standing in this awful room. dark, tall, inhumanely shaped shadows posing over so crookedly. They stared at him with huge holes where eyes should be, not moving an inch. Henry ran back upstairs, longing for his old, run-down house and praying those horrid figures would stay where they were. He reached the bathroom and looked into the real world that was in the mirror and pounded against the cold surface. Now, in reality, Henry ran towards the bedroom, wanting to curl up the covers with his son until they broke. He swung open the door to see a horrific sight. One of the figures was standing by the foot of one of the beds in all of its dark and menacing beauty, staring at Henry's baby boy. Henry stood there with a feeling of pure fear in his stomach. Within a moment, the figure had fled out the window with humanly impossible speed. Beer in one hand, hammer in the other, Henry stood at the front of their house. He swung the hammer at the mirror, and it shattered into a million pieces. The pieces caught the light of the sun and danced across his face and sailed across the street. There was no way he would let that thing in the house with him and Jacob. Harry made breakfast, which was the other mac and cheese box they had the day before. He made sure to set an extra chair for Mr. Joey. "Did you have a good sleep, Jacob?" "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to say that last night. I'm sorry," Jacob said, sobbing through tears. "No, Jacob, I'm sorry." They held each other until they both stopped crying. As nightfall approached, Henry's stomach sank so low it must have been in his shoes. The thoughts that flew through his head were enough to give anybody nightmares. He and his son went to brush their teeth. He saw the mirror, hanging from the wall. It was perfectly intact. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Jacob said. "Nothing, Jacob. Just go to bed." So they both went to bed without brushing their teeth. Harry tried to stay awake. He didn't want to fall asleep. He was afraid of what might happen if he did. Of course, he must have fallen asleep at some point, because he opened his eyes and he was curled in a ball. He felt sick. He slowly looked towards his son's bed. There it was, that evil figure straight out of hell, or somewhere worse. It was standing at the foot of his son's bed. It slowly turned its head toward Henry's. It grinned a horrifically large grin, showing a million little razor-sharp teeth. In a flash, the thing was gone again. Henry would never forget that malicious smile. He stormed into the bathroom and smashed his fist against the mirror and stood in the kitchen of the abstract reality. He walked toward the basement and saw three figures standing in the dark room. "What do you want?" Henry screamed at the top of his lungs, and they all looked at him and smiled. "We want the child," they said in cold, hollow, dead voices, blood endlessly pouring from their smiling mouths. The emaciated figures moved towards him, shaking violently. With outstretched arms, they grabbed Henry, their faces so close to his that he could smell the rot on them. "Give him to us. You don't deserve him." Henry woke up in bed, his son still fast asleep. Every night, that thing got closer to his son. He wouldn't let them have him. Maybe it's what Henry deserved, but not what Jacob deserved. He was going to get them out of here. "Jacob, wake up," he said, shaking his son. "Daddy? We have to leave now. It's not safe here." Henry picked up a couple of things and dragged his boy outside. "Daddy, what about Mr. Joey?" his son said, tearing free of his grip and running inside the house. Harry stood in horror. "Damned bear." He called his son's name and ran after him. As he reached the door to their bedroom, he saw Mr. Joey on the floor, its head separated from its body. Henry opened the door to see the thing holding Jacob in the air. Its gaping white mouth was dripping with saliva, and the long black tongue slid out of its crooked smile and wrapped around Jacob's body. It smiled a madman's smile as it slid out the window and carried Jacob away into the darkness. I know it hurts, Devon, but I would like for you to tell me the story, just one last time. I had just gotten home. I walked through the door, the house keys jingling like chimes in the wind as I slid them into my right pocket. I walked into the living room. It has been so long that I can hardly remember what it looked like. I remember the television being on. She must have left it on and forgotten about it. She always watched the Channel 7 news. I was tired from being outside, as my social anxiety had struck me harder than it usually does. My head ached and throbbed as blood rushed through my veins. I sat down on our father's leather couch and turned the television off so I could rest in the company of silence, the absence of human beings. My hand still shook. My hand would always shake as I walked around in public, my head rushing with the noise around me. And then I got a call. My cell phone rang. I tried to ignore it, but the irritating tune of the ringtone made me pick it up. It was her. I answered the phone and told my dear sister that I was busy. She told me her car got a flat tire. She was never any good with cars. She always phoned me for help. She told me to go to the gas station from which she would always get the licorice stick. If I did not hurry, she would be late. For what, I did not ask. I told her I would head out the door. I didn't go right away. I needed time. It always took me a while before I would go outside again after previous public encounters. If I didn't, I would become far too stressed. I have had few mental breakdowns, but when one occurred, it would take hours for me to become calm. My head would burn with the fire of hell, and the noise would become so loud that I couldn't hear my own thoughts. Granted, I was younger when this occurred, but I still feared the anxiety would send my head into oblivion yet again. So I waited. For almost 20 minutes I sat on our father's couch, the brown leather siding with my every movement. I shouldn't have waited. The mental disorientation I was attempting to save myself from was horseshit compared to the knife that would run through my skull. I remember walking up to the gas station, its flickering blue tinted lights attracting friendly moths. I remember seeing her there on the ground. At first, I didn't realize what had happened. I stood, deaf and dumb, staring at her as she lay in her own puddle of crimson. After what seemed like millennia, I walked over to her and kneeled down. The knife was launched in her side. Its handle was red like the blood it had spilled. My arms wrapped around her ragdoll body. Still not comprehending the situation I was in, I just held her, sweet red blood running through my fingers and into the cold, stony ground. And then the knife ran through my skull, with its blade forged from pain. That's all I remember of that moment. The man who had... He was just some thug of the street. They found him, locked him away. It didn't seem like enough. They said if I had been there a few minutes earlier, I would have been there to protect her. But instead, I lounged in my own selfish, petty problems on a leather couch, thinking that I needed a break from life. I had rested. It was my fault. It was my fault that my sister. There is no describing that feeling. The person who I had grown and spent my life with had just vanished in a split second. And it was my own fault. I remember her funeral. It was quiet. There was so much darkness, from the misery of the people surrounding me, their clothes as black as night, to the feeling she left me behind with. They even drove up to the house. It was a secluded property. Vines of greenery had gradually slithered their way up the house over the years, like large snakes that slid over the house's white skin. Despite the age of the house, it was well preserved. Devon got out of the car and walked towards it. He had bought it a couple months ago. He couldn't stay in the house he used to live in. The house welcomed him with its embrace of emptiness as he opened the door. There was nothing inside the house, no furniture, no pictures on the walls. The wooden floor groaned as he walked in, and walls screamed at his fingertips as he ran them across the smooth surface of the wallpaper. Most of the walls were painted white, but the entrance room had floral wallpaper, God knows why. The kitchen to his left, living room to his right, and ahead was a doorway near the staircase. The doorway led to the dining room, which he thought was an odd distance from the kitchen. All the door had creaked as if 1,000 years of stress waiting upon them, as if opening them stretched their wood and metal muscles after a long rest. The stairs were dusty, and he left footprints as he descended, which disturbed years of peace. His hands ran across the smooth wooden surface of the railing. As he was on the final step to the top, he was greeted with a hallway. There was one door on the left side of the wall and three on the right. They even peeked through the first door on the right. It was a large room, with wooden planked walls and red wallpaper with more floral designs. The floor was a rich dark wood paneling. Along the sides were shelves filled with books of ancient knowledge, their red and green with occasional blue, spines alternating across the old shelves. Storybooks, encyclopedias, and novels. The library was a beautiful room, and in the middle was a large black piano. His sister had taught him how to play. Ever since he was her kid brother, she took lessons, and they even learned what he could from her. He wasn't very good, but he enjoyed the time spent with her. He hadn't played. Not since it happened. For 3 years he hadn't played. Devon sat down on the black bench in front of the piano, his hand running through his messy brown hair. He lowered his arms, fingers set on the ivory of the keys, and his white sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He attempted to play one of the songs his sister had taught him, but with every other note he would make errors. For every other goddamned note, he fucked up. In anger, he slammed his fist on the ivory, and the sounds of 1,000 notes rang through the house's empty walls. His teeth clenched and his blood boiled in his veins as he became stressed. He sat there like so, and after a minute, he gently rested his shoulders and made himself become calm. He sat up and walked out of the room, his jeans rustling. He silently closed the library door as he entered the hall again. He still had a few more rooms to explore. He had already seen the house before buying it, however, it was a while back. He wanted to look at things in depth. He wanted to refresh his memory. He checked the second door on the right. It was the bedroom. It was smaller than the library, but still pleasantly large. It had wallpaper with a pattern not unlike the library's, but it was a seafoam green in this room. The bed had matching covers, and beside it was a small table with a drawer. On the other side was a closet with wooden doors. Devon walked towards the bed and sat down on its edge. It seemed like the sheets were recently cleaned. They were immaculate. The pillows were white with frilled edges. This room was nice. He felt at home in here. He laid down on the bed and looked at the ceiling. A small light bulb hung from the middle of the textured ceiling. He didn't search the last room on the right side of the hall very thoroughly. It was only the laundry room. There were two machines in front of a white wall and a wooden cupboard above them. The room on the left side of the hall. It was all that was left. It was a bedroom, white walls, a shower with glass panels around it, a sliding door in the front, a porcelain toilet, and a sink with a mirror. Devon looked into the mirror. It was cracked, as if 1,000 years of faces were stored in ancient memory, tearing its old seam. As Devon stared into it, he felt lost, and the man in the mirror was not the same as the one outside. This man. This man was happy, content, unbroken, preserved in the mirror's ancient frame and spiderweb fractures on its silver surface. Devon stood in the parking lot of the Save Mart shopping center. He had packed all of his possessions from his old home, but he didn't have much to begin with. He needed food for the most part, but he couldn't go any closer to the doors of the large store. He tried to make himself, but his nerves buzzed and his legs stood still. The parking lot was an okay place, at least compared to the inside of the Safe Mart, and he didn't want to leave it. But not only was it good for him to at least try to enter social situations, but he needed groceries. As he walked through the doors of the store, he began to feel lightheaded, sick, and his hand began to shake. There were so many people, crowded, shoving, pushing, screaming. The noise was so loud that Devon nearly knelt over in mental and seemingly physical pain. Slowly he shuffled on. Then it hit him. He didn't know where anything was. Where was the food? Where were the home supplies? How would he find the things he needed? Then, through the noisy crowd of screaming people, he spotted people wearing green Safe Mart jackets, which speckled parts of the crowd. He kept his head down and his hands over his ears as he made his way toward the employee. The man in the green jacket spotted him. He had a red beard, neatly trimmed, with somewhat long, scraggly hair. He was heavily built, and a name tag on his chest read Crosby. "Welcome to Safe Mart. All your shopping needs in one place with unbeatable prices. How can I help you today?" the man said, blandly, with an artificial smile. Devon just stood in one spot, head spinning, not able to speak. "Yo, dude, you okay?" asked the employee. At that, Devon dashed into a nearby aisle, avoiding conversations. He spotted a row of mac and cheese boxes on the aisle he was next to. He grabbed an armful and went to the till. Devon paid for the food, rushed out the doors towards his car, its blue roof raised high above the others. He shoved the boxes of mac and cheese in the passenger seat and shut the door. Quiet. His hand was still shaking, his head was still spinning. Devon stood in the kitchen, head resting on the marble counter. The surface felt cool against his throbbing head. One by one, he grabbed the mac and cheese boxes and neatly placed them in the cupboard above his head, his hands steady, or at least more so. That night was the first night he'd spent in the house. Before he got some sleep, he thought he'd washed the sheets on his bed. They looked like they had been taken care of, but he just thought it would be better for his peace of mind. As he had no basket, he carried the sheets into the laundry room. In the cupboard, there was washing machine soap. He shoved the sheet in, dumped in the soap, and turned it on. The machine came to life and shook violently, its white frame rattling. He closed the door and the noise of the machine died a little. Across the hall, he opened the door to the bathroom and washed his hands. The mirror caught his glance. The man in the fractured mirror stared back at Davon, the old frame holding him in place. Davon wondered what this man was thinking. Was there really a version of him that could be happy? He raised his hand and rested on the cool spider-webbed reflection, the man in the frame following his gestures. His fingers touched the surface, sending a chill feeling up his arm and deep into his soul. Pain rippled through his body as he screamed. His teeth flashed in the light, roars bounced off the walls. His body was torn apart, skin ripped from his body, and his heart beat impossibly fast as it burned a hole through his chest. And then everything shattered. The world, the universe, fell apart. Davon opened his eyes. The room was different. It was colder. The entire surface of the mirror had been smashed, somehow holding itself together. He walked out of the bathroom. The window that was once at the end of the hall had been placed on the floor, which granted access to a view of the house below. The walls of the house boomed, and hairline fractures ran across them like veins on a living creature. All the doors along the hall were unevenly shaped. The doorknob on one was at the top of the door. This world, it was far more abstract than the one Davon had come to know. The second door on the left was painted black. Second door. This was new. He reached for the handle, and the door began to violently shake, chips of wood falling from the door frame as it neatly tore away from its hinges. He opened it. The house began to scream as larger cracks slithered their way up the walls. The noise pierced Davon's skull. A dark, sick feeling formed in his stomach. Dread. He slammed the door shut and there was silence. The door was freezing cold and pitch black. He couldn't see a thing. Davon was scared to move. He was surrounded by nothingness. He outstretched his shaking hand and it brushed against something hanging from the ceiling, making him flinch as horrifying thoughts ran through his head for a split second. It took a second for him to realize what it was. He pulled it. The room became dimly lit as a flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling, emanating heat and welcomed light. He could barely see the walls as black veins pulsed through the dirty yet white paint. Mold was splattered across the floor. Then, as if it was an afterthought, he saw it, a tall dark figure, skin blacker than the mold running across the room. Its emaciated figure rose and fell as its broken, misshaped ribcage sucked in the stale air. Its twisted neck balanced an eyeless, toothy head. Davon became weak as fear drove itself into his heart. The emaciated figure opened its enormous mouth, long yellow teeth ready to tear flesh from bone. Dark red fluid poured from its mouth, pooling on the floor. The light hanging from the ceiling flickered and went out. It was only out for a second. As it relit the room, the creature was smiling, face to face with Davon, its throaty gurgling breath clinging to Davon's face as he screamed for all he was worth. He shut his eyes tight and reached for the doorknob. Then, darkness. Harry stumbled over bottles as he emptily shuffled towards the couch. His heart no longer knew how to beat. His blood, for all he cared, had stopped running through his veins. He dropped his frail, broken body onto the couch. Its frames squeezed and cracked as he did it, dust flying softly into the air as a small ray of sunlight illuminated them through a small crack in the curtains of the apartment. As he sat still on the couch, he stared at the wall. Its paint was peeled and strained. His eyes no longer knew how to cry. They just stared into whatever was as empty as them. This was Henry's life. For the last 2 decades, he sat, drank, and stared. One more drink couldn't kill me, he thought, as he reached for a half-empty bottle of something on the arm of his couch. Its dark brown glass shone in the sliver of light. He gulped down the last of its stale contents, Despite the fact that his taste buds had long since ceased to function, he continued to stare at the peeled paint. A small insect crawled across the dilapidated wall. It stopped in the middle and changed direction. Before it reached the ceiling, Henry threw the brown bottle at it, covering the wall with the tasteless liquid it held along with the remainings of the insect. He ran a hand from the side of his face, through his greasy beard and across his uncut hair. He was filled with depression, not the feeling of sadness, not anger, not fear, not happiness, but the feeling of nothing. He had lost the ability to feel emotion. He reached for another half-empty bottle and finished it. He then pulled his fragile carcass off the couch, dropping the bottle, which painted the floor with small brown pieces of glass and whatever was inside. Harry began to walk towards the closet near the front door of his apartment room. His feet pressed against the small pieces of broken glass, red liquid flowing from the open wound. He merely glanced down and ignored the blood pooling at his filthy bare feet. From out of the closet he pulled a box. The cardboard box held the last of his personal belongings. Inside was a beer-stained shirt, an old torn picture of Jacob, and an orange extension cord. He reached in and pulled the image from atop of the shirt. In the picture, Jacob was wearing a yellow rain jacket that was 2 sizes too big. Under the hood, he wore a stupid, childish grin that was full of childhood feelings. Harry stuffed the picture into his pocket and reached for the extension cord. After close to 50 years, it was time to rid the world of whatever was inside his skin. The leftovers of a man who had once lived had long since vacated, leaving no reason to let a hollow shell take up space in a world that knew not of his existence. Hysteria creeps slowly into its host and spreads like a disease until it consumes all other thoughts in the mind it will soon occupy. Davon woke up with a start, his heart pounding out of his ribcage. That was not a dream. The image of the figure was burned into his mind. Its pitch-black skin hung from its body. He tried to shove it out of his mind, but it was still there in the corner of his every thought. He rolled himself out of the bed and found himself in the nude. He walked toward the closet and found a white button-up and jeans to put on, as usual. He walked out of the bedroom door. On the left side of the room was a single door, not two, just a door and some empty wall space. He pressed his hand against the wall where the door once was. It was just a wall. Its white paint was smooth and undisturbed. This fact began to override the idea that what happened was real. Maybe it was a dream. As if on command, his thought triggered a feeling of being watched. Davon turned around, met with nothing but an empty wall. The feeling of eyes still pierced his body. Davon shuddered and walked, or more accurately ran, down the stairs and into the kitchen. He reached into the cupboard above his head and grabbed one of the neatly organized boxes of mac and cheese, and then realized he had no freaking pots. Henry stood on the stool and fastened the extension cord into the fan of the ceiling. He had no idea how to tie a noose. He just made crude knots until it looked decent enough. He could feel the death that clung to the orange plastic of the cord. He stood on the tip of his toes so he was able to get the cord around his neck. He stood there, fan above his head. It had stopped working about 10 years ago. Orange loop around his neck, its orange plastic covered with a layer of mold pressed against the embedded skin, facial hair saggier than ever, stool at his feet, wobbling on uneven legs. He let out a lungful of air and prepared himself for the end to hug him closely to its morose, beatless heart. With his feet, Harry shoved the stool away. Pain ran through his neck as he dangled from the ceiling. He ignored the pain, as the silence would be worth the wait. But then he needed air. He knew it would be painful, but his lungs screamed and his arms began to thrash. His legs kicked the air. He wanted this. He wanted it to end, but the pain was unbearable. For almost a minute, he flung his arms and legs violently in the air. His mouth gargled and rolled with spit that ran down his face and onto his shirt. The floor seemed to be a million kilometers away, and then he began to get weak. His thrashing began to subside. He felt peaceful. He knew it was coming. The room around him darkened. He was almost gone. He felt rumble land on his face, which he ignored. But then there was more, along with a crackling sound. No, he thought, I only need a little more time. And then loud noises came from above him, and the ceiling fan came crashing down on top of him. The extension cord around his neck loosened and he felt oxygen rushing into his lungs, blood and brain. He was on his hands and knees on the floor, ceiling fan beside him, broken and mangled. "Fuck!" he screamed, pounding the ground with his fist. He stood up, extension cord still around his neck, however it was now detached from the fan, and threw himself against the wall. "Fuck, fuck, 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 fucking fuck," he screamed at the top of his lungs, and with every profane word he bellowed, his fist created a new hole in the wall. "Fuck you," he screamed to nobody. He kept wailing and pounding until his nose began to pour blood. His veins throbbed in his neck and face, and tears rained from his eyes, down his untrimmed beard and into his shirt, in which they soaked. After a trip to the near empty building of Save Mart, not many people go shopping at 3 o'clock in the morning. Davon managed to get the supplies he needed: more food, cooking utensils, cookbooks and other assorted useful items. As he pulled up in his driveway yet again, he felt himself become cold. The feeling of being watched had returned, or more accurately, he returned to it. He attempted to shrug it off and carried the paper bags into the house and set them on the kitchen table. He set one of the pots onto the top of the stove and set the temperature on high as he filled it with water. After he stared at the water for a minute, it bubbled over the top. He tore the top of the mac and cheese box and spilled its contents into the ferocious water, steam rising from the top. He waited and stared at the water until he decided it was done well enough, emptied the water into the sink, and stirred in milk, butter, and powdered cheese. He sat at the kitchen table, feeding himself the artificially flavored pasta in bland spoonfuls of the undercooked noodles. Davon awoke with a start. He was being watched. It wasn't a feeling. He began to shake under his now cold bedsheets. It wasn't a feeling this time. He knew it was there. He reached to the bedside table and switched on the light. He saw it, not it. He knew it was there. He could see where it was, but he couldn't see it. In the far corner of his room, the corner which the light could not reach, it was there, trembling in the darkness as it stared at him. The darkness seemed to cling to the walls around it. He could hear its irregular breathing. He could hear the blood bubbling in the back of its throat as air escaped its mouth. Davon's hands shook violently and his teeny voice squeaked. The thing wouldn't move. It was hiding in the darkness. Tension rose higher with every second it was there. Then its hand. From out of the corner of the darkness he could see its mangled hand and long bony claws covered in skin darker than night. Its fingers gently moved and its knuckles cracked. He began to see its torso. He could see its chest rise. Its face was invisible in the darkness of the room's corner. He could only make out part of its emaciated corpse of a body. Why wouldn't it move? He wanted it to move, but it was just there, staring at him. Fuzzy noises filled Davon's head and he began to feel dizzy. "No," he yelled. He didn't know why. "Go away." The words lingered on his tongue as his throat rumbled. The words that came out of his chest were louder than he expected, and he nearly scared himself. And then it was done. It was gone. Its hand had pulled back into the shadows, and the corner of the room slowly lit up from the lamp of his desk as the thing disappeared. Davon rushed himself out of his bed and flickered all the lights of the bedroom, lighting up more than a bedside lamp did. His forehead beaded with sweat, and he found it hard to catch his breath. So he went downstairs to try to do something to keep his mind off what he had experienced. Hysteria was beginning to fed off of his mind and sanity. He knew these things could not logically exist, but it was there. He pulled his phone from his pocket and turned it on. Internet connection failed. Please check your connection and try again. He got in his car, the engine revved to life, and he drove out. He ignored any laws of the road that he would normally obey. He reached a McDonald's fast food restaurant. A free Wi-Fi sticker was plastered in the corner of the door window. He parked his car, turned on his phone, and tapped the internet browser icon. He filled the search bar with jumbled words that he thought were somewhat relevant. Then he began finding things. 8-year-old boy abducted. August 12, 1995. 8-year-old Jacob Leaning was abducted, presumably during a home invasion. 29-year-old father Henry Linning was questioned but did not comment and had been placed under psychological analysis due to signs of hysteria and mental disorder. 60-year-old Barbara Hammock came forth with supposed evidence. She claimed that she witnessed an elongated dark creature carrying an unconscious child. But when tested for drugs, the results were positive and she later confirmed that she had recently taken hallucinogenic drugs before the incident occurred. As of now, there is no sign of the missing child, but law enforcement would continue studying the case and search parties have been gathered. It was an old newspaper article, and there were more. In 1995, a young man named Ellis moved into a new apartment, hoping that moving into a new place with more people would help rid himself of depression, and disappeared a month after the move. With no body ever found and no witnesses to see any inhuman demons. However, they confirmed that Ellis had taken a downward spiral in his mental condition and his apartment was covered in veiny mold, specifically in the bathroom, where a mirror had been smashed. The two children in the Hudworth family disappeared in 2008 after moving into a new house, and the mother claimed to see a tall figure seemingly disappear in the night's veil. The most bizarre, although unofficial, story was about how an entire house had disappeared in 1979. Nearby residents claimed that the old woman who had lived in the house was mentally unstable, but there were no denying that an entire building had seemingly disappeared off the face of the planet. They even felt like he had lost the last of his sanity. The thing, or these things, took time. They never took anybody at first. They took their time to explore the lives of these people, to find their weakness. Steven sure had his own issues. He didn't know how long he had. He turned the engine of his car back on and began to drive. He did not know where to, but he drove until he found himself in the parking lot of his therapist. Maybe the man could still help him. He had stopped seeing his therapist a while ago. He felt that he had a handle on the goings on, but he clearly had not because this creature could not be real. It was illogical. It was his imagination. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. It was raining heavily. By the time he reached the front door, his shirt was drenched. "Linda, where's Mr. Gallard?" he asked the receptionist as he entered. "He's in his office, Devon. Then welcome back. Long time no see," she chirped. He ignored her comments and strutted towards his old therapist's office. He threw the doors open and entered. The room was dark, a light on his desk illuminating what it could. Gallard sat in a leather chair, barely visible in the light. "Devon, sit," said the man in his recognizable rough voice. "Sir," Devon peeped. "I was expecting you. Now sit," said the old man. Devon took the offer and sat down in a wicker chair. "Do you blame yourself, Devon?" "Mr. Gallard, I think I'm going insane," David stammered, and a lump in his throat formed. "I think I'm breaking down." "Do you blame yourself for what happened to your sister?" Devon paused. The word "yes" rolled out of his mouth, independent of his thoughts. "Good," said the old man. He leaned forward, the light making his old, wrinkled face and silver hair visible. "It was your fault. You might as well have killed her yourself." Devon only managed a half-assed, "What?" The old man leaned in even closer and grinned. "You killed your sister, Devon. You killed her." Devon lunged at the man in a flail of fists. He bashed his fists at the old man's face. Teeth flew and blood poured. Devon screamed unrecognizable words as he beat the old man on the ground. He stopped. The old man didn't move. Devon looked at his hands, which were covered in blood. He could see the bones on his knuckles. Pain throbbed through his hands. The old man's eyes were rolled back into his bruised, bloody head, and the floor was stained with pooled blood. Devon ran. He ran out of the front door, ignoring whatever the receptionist said as he broke through the doors and into the rain. He got in his car and slammed on the wheel. "God damn it," he screamed, as the car's horn echoed in the empty parking lot. He put his hands on the wheel, which was now covered in slippery red blood, and turned the key in the side. The wheels of his car screamed as he spun out of the parking lot. His head pounded as he sped home. What did he just do? He just killed somebody. Shit. He heard a siren behind him. Red and blue flashed behind him. He slowly pulled over and frantically began to erase any evidence he could. He wiped the blood off his hands with the bottom of his jeans and covered his knuckles with his sleeves. "License and registration, please," said a woman in a blue jacket. Devon scrambled for the glove compartment and gave a handful of things to the police officer. He kept quiet and didn't say a word. The woman turned on her flashlight and stood still for a minute as she shone her light on the handful of papers and junk. "Sir, you are speeding quite a bit. Is everything okay?" said the officer monotonously. Devon tried harder to cover his knuckles and managed to stammer the word "yeah." She wrote something down on a piece of paper and handed it to Devon. It was a speeding ticket. He heard the officer's car door shut and he rested his head on the steering wheel and exhaled loudly. The police car passed him and drove off into the distance. Devon slept in his car that night. When he awoke, he slowly drove home, hardly awake. He rolled into his driveway and welcomed the feeling of being in his house. He made his way upstairs and into the bathroom. He ran his hands under the warm water of the sink and washed away the blood. He looked up into the mirror. Devon pulled himself out of bed as his body trembled. He felt its presence. It was not in the room, but it was there. He got dressed, set the sheets on his bed. He sat at the table. He didn't eat. The boxes of mac and cheese were still lined up on his cupboard. He didn't have anybody to see, to talk to. Was he going to die here, alone? But then he got an idea. The man named Henry Linning. The man had survived an encounter with a creature. He could research where Linning lived and met him. Devon pulled out his phone and was yet again met with an error message. He rushed outside into the car so he could go back to the McDonald's building. This time he obeyed the laws of the road. He couldn't risk being caught. What if the police had found the body of his therapist? The first people they would suspect were his patients. He pulled into the parking lot of the building and searched for the article about the Linnings. After about 10 minutes of searching, he found a version of the article that gave an address. It was only 2 hours away. 278 Ashton Drive. Devon repeated these words in his head as he drove through a road surrounded by trees. Soon enough, he found a driveway with a mailbox that had the address 27818. As he pulled up, he saw an old, rundown house. There were cardboard boxes abandoned on the front lawn, which was covered in grey and yellow dead grass. He stepped out of the car and into the gravel. The gravel rustled under his feet as he walked towards the old house and opened the door in the middle of the once pink exterior. The house was very small and dust swirled in the air like silvery glitter. The house was empty. The kitchen, the living room and the bedroom had all been abandoned for years. And then he reached the bathroom. Above the sink was a stain in a rectangular shape. There was once a mirror there. Devon didn't want to spend any more time in this place. He walked back into his car and opened his phone. The leaning man must have moved to another place. He searched for the number of the mental institution in this area. When he dialed the number, the ring was ended as a woman answered, who politely gave him Lenning's new address when he asked. Another 2 hours drive. It was an apartment building. It looked as if it shouldn't be standing, and Devon wondered how this man would live in such conditions. This apartment was more run down than the pink house. The building seemed empty. He didn't trust the elevator, so he took the stairs to the third floor, room 304. As he opened the door, he was met with a horrendous stench. Flies escaped the crack of the door. He walked in, stumbling over endless empty bottles of booze. Then he saw Harry Lenning. The man's colorless body lay in the middle of the floor, cloudy eyes gazing into emptiness and mouth covered in saliva. Lenning's wrists were torn open, presumably by the beer bottle shards in his dead clutched hand, and an unbelievable amount of blood was surrounding him. Devon was halfway through dialing the authorities when he realized that this would be the second body the authorities would tie to him. He slowly slipped the phone back into his pocket. He felt hopeless. Is this where he would end up? Like Harry Lenning? Is this what happens when that sick tall fuck steals your sanity? Devon stormed into his house, left the door open and ran up the stairs, each step echoing through the house. He cracked through the bathroom door and faced the mirror. He took a deep breath and held it. Devon's fingers were torn from his hand, his skin was ripped to bits and his hand crushed into pulp as the world around him yet again crumbled. And then he was there. He couldn't resist. He had to put his hand on the mirror. Just one last time, he thought. It was dark, as if the house itself had consumed the light and left Davon in blackness, the likes of which he had never experienced before. He felt them more than one. They were all there, watching him. He felt their eyes on his every inch of skin. They stood in the shadows of the darkness, their anti-rhythmic breathing filling the air with stench. As Davon continued into the hall, there were only more of them. He could sense movement. As he stumbled his way through the hall, he could hear the piano softly playing from the library. Davon's skin crawled like spiders and his spine tingled. He could see the library door in front of him, but only because his nose was nearly touching his soft wooden face. The doorknob felt cold in his hand, and it whispered to his fingertips, telling him no. He did not listen, and as he turned the squeaky metal, the door swung open and the sound of fists hitting the keys of the piano emanating through the darkness, and Davon was pulled or pushed into the stale room of the library. With a gasp, he fell into his bag and looked around frantically. It was dark, but he could make out the shelves around the room, their books scattered across the floor. The piano gently continued as if the player had just been distracted momentarily, but Davon felt no presence in the room. It was empty. His only companions were the books strewed across the floor, their pages torn and crumbled. Davon, not able to resist the urge, called out for another presence, and the only thing worse than having no response was the one he got. Hello. Davon could feel the trothy words on the back of his neck. He could feel a breath cling to his skin. Its voice was old, deep, and filled with thousands of years of pent-up malice. Its long, bony hands emerged from behind Davon's head, and they slowly wrapped themselves around Davon's face. The slender, crackling bones felt cold on his soft, white skin, and his entire body stopped. His heart no longer beat, his lungs no longer stirred. Inside his head, he prayed for God to find him. Davon, there is no God. There is only you and I. Davon arose from his bed, the sheets clinging to his skin. It had been 3 weeks since he had left his house. He felt alone, except for the presence of the thing with black skin. His mind was in slow motion. He feared that if he went outside, people might know what he had done to Gallard, but Davon was becoming weak. That is what it wants. He had to go outside or else something. He didn't know. He didn't want to know. After getting dressed in the usual, Davon headed downstairs. He grabbed his phone and his keys off the kitchen table and put them in his pocket. He headed out the door and towards the car. He sat in his car and debated whether or not to get out. He was at a coffee shop. It was small and had few customers. If Davon didn't go in, that would mean he had lost, right? He had no choice. He got out of the car and locked the door. An electronic bell sounded as he opened the door to the coffee shop. It smelled of coffee and chocolate. There were 4 empty tables and 2 more with others using them. A couple sat on one and chatted about their day. The other one was being used by a group of teenagers who looked particularly bored. He walked towards the front and a man with an overly stylish haircut asked him what he would like to order. Davon stalled. He didn't know what he wanted and he began to get nervous. His fingers fidgeted and his hands shook. At this point he realized that there was an old lady behind him, looking rather impatient. She gave him a mean look. I'll just get a coffee or something. Surprise me with a coffee. Davon stammered as the old lady looked at him funny. When the man handed him the paper coffee cup, Davon swiped it out of the man's hand as fast as he could and dropped some money on the counter without knowing the exact amount. He quickly made his way to an empty table in the corner of the shop with his head lowered. As he sipped his coffee, he imagined a SWAT team pinning him to the ground as they executed him on the spot, a bullet or 2 to the head, and sent pain matters into the coffee cups of the nearby customers. He wondered if people had found the body yet. What would happen when they did? His hand still shook, and it was getting worse. There were not many people in the little building. This small number of people would not normally bother him, but now he could hear his heartbeat. He could feel his heartbeat. Suddenly, the old lady who was behind him in the line, now sitting at her own little table, trashed in her seat. Davon stood up, spilled his coffee, and tried to figure out what to do. What could he do? The old woman breathed out of her mouth. Somebody help her, he said, at last. All the people looked at Devon as if he was crazy and went back to their conversations. Could they not see the old lady? Her arms stretched and dangled at her sides, and her mouth opened wide, jaw crackling. Why could nobody see this? Devon's heart pounded in his chest. The woman's mouth was still opening, her jaws becoming wider and wider. What's wrong with you people? Can't you see her? Devon yelled, which got him no more attention than his previous attempt. The woman's mouth overflowed with dark red blood, and the liquid rolled down her side and onto the floor. Fingers began to emerge from the liquid inside the woman's mouth, which pushed more blood onto her once blue shirt. The fingers slowly rose out of her gaping jaw, followed by a hand. No, this can't be happening. It's my own imagination, Devon told himself. He ran to the bathroom doors and accidentally knocked his table over. Devon slammed the bathroom door behind him and screamed. His mind was slowly overrun by hysteria. He threw his fist into the mirror above the sink and shattered it, small pieces sticking out of his flesh. He turned on the water in the sink and began washing the blood off his hand as he gently plucked out small shards from his skin. His head spun and his hand shook violently, making it nearly impossible to separate the pieces of the mirror from his hand. "Hey, are you okay in there?" came a voice from the other side of the door. When the voice received no answer, it knocked at the door. "Hey, are you in there?" it said. Devon leaped over and swung open the door. He kept his head down as he ran through the man at the door, who was the same man who served him his coffee. He kept his head down until he reached his car. He left blood along the side of the door as he scrambled for the handle as he realized what he had locked in. His hand burned as he shoved it into his pocket and searched for his keys. I'm losing. I'm losing my sanity. I'm losing whatever game that thing is playing with me. I'm seeing things and hearing things. What happens if I get weaker? What happens if the thing takes me? During animation, Devon is shown using the mirror. Devon stood in the abstract reality he had visited. The walls still hummed and rumbled. He walked out of the bathroom. The door was there. As he walked towards it, it was still and silent. He gripped the handle and tore it open. The room was empty. Its flickery light dangled from the ceiling, but there was nothing else. He went down the stairs and into the house's entrance. He wondered what would happen if he went outside. He put his hand on the doorknob. Its metal surface whispered to his fingertips. It told him to go back, that he shouldn't be here. The moon was high. There were no stars. He walked down his driveway and into the road. Large cracks ran across the surface. He could see another house, so he began to walk towards it. In its front yard was an upside-down tree, surrounded by an upside-down picket fence painted white. The house was old and broken, its roof was caved in, and its front door was torn from its hinges. Suddenly, the street was filled with people. People, noise, movement. Devon screamed as the noise of people pierced his ears. The crowd shoved into him on all sides, pushing and shoving. Devon's hands shook and his knees buckled. His head hit the pavement with a soft crack, and he curled up into a ball, clutching his ears and rocking back and forth. A woman reached out to him and Devon screamed. The woman stumbled back and everything stopped. Devon picked his head out, his face covered in tears. They all looked at him. The figure stood among them. Its black flesh sagged from its bone. Devon could barely see through the people. It slowly walked toward Devon. Its bones clicked with every movement. Every person it touched, it swept away in a pile of ashes. Devon ran, pushing through the crowd, covering his head. He reached his house and stumbled up the stairs. He could feel the creature close by. He slammed the front door behind him and ran into the kitchen. He stood in the corner waiting for the door opened. He could see it. It grinned, flashing its large yellow teeth as blood dripped from its jaws. Its smile was far too big for its head, and its eyeless face stared at him. Devon reached for a kitchen knife, and the creature slid towards him on all fours at an inhuman speed. As it stood up, Devon shoved the knife in its side. He shut his eyes tight, squeezing salty water from his eyes. When he opened them, he saw his sister. The knife was plunged deep into her side. She was looking at him, her dark hair falling over her face. She looked up and her face was one of pain. Devon, why? Why did... said his sister as she fell to the ground, blood spraying across the walls, windows, and Davon's face. He fell to his knees. His emotions ceased. His hand rested on the ground, laying still. He hung his head. He was done. He just couldn't do anything. From behind him, long thin arms with black skin began to wrap themselves around his body, gripping him with its icy bones. Its long fingers wrapped around his shoulders. He could see its head beside his. It was grinning as it opened its mouth and a long tongue slid out. It poured out like a long fleshy tail and ran along the side of Davon's face. Its arms squeezed his body. Crushing his spine in the chilly embrace. Every bone in his body shattered. October 19, 2014. A young man, Davon Ivory, age 24, disappeared after buying a house in rural BC. The house was purchased after the tragic death of his sister, Abigail Ivory. The man had seen a therapist to cope with the loss of his sister, and when authorities went to question the therapist, Arthur Gallard, say obituary on page 12, they found the man dead in his office. He appeared to be brutally beaten to death, and it is speculated that Davon Ivory was the assailant. Authorities still have no sign of the man and are urging the public to be wary, as the man is considered armed and dangerous. End. Credited to Rain Mazies / Pandora's Box Unlocked. My brother moved out of the house back in 2002 once he got his job as a computer technician, and he recently went missing. When I went to his house, it was locked, with 3 sheets of printer paper taped to the front door. While coming home from work one day, I noticed someone had left their damaged plain grey laptop laying in the middle of my driveway. I got out of my car to examine it more carefully. The LCD definitely showed signs of user-related damage. There was a large hole on the left side of the screen that appears to fit a standard Phillips head screwdriver perfectly. There was a webcam above the display, and it was also destroyed with what looked like the same screwdriver. Other than those, everything else on the computer showed minor signs of wear. Almost all the keyboard's keys were faded, but not to the extent that the laptop could be considered unusable. I looked at the back of the display to find out what brand it is, but I couldn't find anything. I looked at the entire laptop's shell, but there was no text or logo stating what brand it was. In fact, there was no warranty sticker, no proof of license sticker on the bottom, no text whatsoever. What was even more odd was the fact that the only ports on the laptop were a VGA port for connecting an external display and a USB port. How could this laptop have possibly run without a charging port to recharge the battery? It must have been a very low-end laptop where you had to remove the battery pack and put it back in its own charging dock. Why did it have a webcam though? Curious as to what was on the laptop, I ran inside to my basement where my old desktop was currently being stored. The reason it was down there was because I forgot to bring that behemoth to the local StarCan to recycle it. I would have been using it as my regular computer, but it takes 5 or 6 hours to fully boot because the system always goes through recovery mode every time you start it. And the process is way too slow to recover everything on the 500 GB hard drive I had installed on it. A 120 MHz Pentium processor doesn't get you far. I removed the old LG CRT monitor from the desktop and plugged it into the laptop. I went to push the button when there is no way this is going to work. The battery has to be dead by now. I rummaged around the basement to find my battery voltage tester and immediately withdrew the battery from the laptop and checked the voltage. Lo and behold, it had no charge. Well, I thought, might as well just leave it and take everything to Starken tomorrow morning. With that, I unplugged the display from the laptop, put it back into the desktop and simply left everything downstairs. After leaving the basement, I went to go watch TV for about 3 hours or so before going to bed. I was suddenly awoken from my deep slumber by the sound of the Windows 2000 startup jingle and fell out of my bed. It was so deafeningly loud, I swore someone was holding a pair of speakers right next to my ears. I stood up in a groggy daze, and it took a couple of minutes to figure out what the sound was. The desktop. I must have accidentally hit the power switch while trying to switch monitors. I headed to the basement, but froze in the middle of the steps. I just remembered there was no way my computer could have started up, because I have Windows 95 installed on my desktop. I was reluctant to go down the steps after that, but my common sense started kicking in, and I thought I must be getting my OSs mixed up. When I walked down, I was shocked to see that my desktop wasn't on. In fact, I remembered it wasn't even plugged in. I had to make sure of it though. I checked behind the desktop, everything else was plugged in except for the power. There was absolutely no chance of that laptop turning on. It was impossible. I removed the battery from the laptop again and rechecked the voltage. This time I couldn't get a direct number. The voltage tester was just going insane. I reinserted the battery and pressed the power button on the laptop. Some indicator lights flashed, meaning the computer definitely started, except this time the startup jiggle wasn't played at all. I needed to see what was going on here. I connected the CRT monitor back into the laptop, and what I saw was a bare desktop with three icons in the corner. The taskbar was empty, and there was no start menu button. The wallpaper was black. Why would anyone do this to their desktop? Anyone could remove all the icons, but they had to be pretty skilled hackers to remove the start menu button. Of the three icons, one was a games folder, one was a videos folder, and the last was the DOS command prompt program. Maybe this was a kid's laptop. Checking on the games folder confirmed my suspicions. A little girl must have owned this laptop. I felt some remorse for the poor girl because there was only one game in the folder. The program name was princess.exe. I clicked on it just to see what the game was like. A fully animated title screen came out, with various generic fairy tale princesses twirling across the screen, and then the logo flew down with a bunch of sparkly doves holding it. The game was called Princess Creator Make Yourself Beautiful. Ah, so it must have been one of those low-budget, put PNG of various clothing items onto a photo of yourself games. I was right. As the menu popped up, I was given the option dress up or to view pretty pictures. I wanted to see what the girl looked like, so I clicked on the second option. She had to have been no more than 5, and on top of that, she looked very cute. She was of either Mexican or Spanish origin. She wore a somewhat tattered white dress with small red frills around the sleeves and collar. It had small roses on it. I smiled, as she looked like she had a lot of fun putting a virtual tiara on her head. However, browsing through the photos about halfway through, there were pictures of a room with nothing else but a bed inside. She must have been dodging the camera for the hell of it, I guess. After that, I felt I've seen enough with that program, and might as well go see the other two files on the laptop. I decided to go into the command prompt to see if I could locate any other files on the hard drive. I simply got the line with no drive letter. Okay, this is really strange, I thought. I typed into the command box start c dot slash to see if I could open the directory I wanted to explore. I pressed enter, and DOS simply replied, start is not recognized as an internal or external command, operable program or batch file. After a few seconds, the program crashed, bringing me back to the desktop. So I guess the last thing to look at is the videos. I double-clicked the folder, and the screen faded to black. I thought it crashed, but I noticed there was a small line flashing in the top left corner. Suddenly the text start dot slash videos slash 001 WMV flashed briefly, then a video appeared in full screen. It was the girl again. This time she was smiling, bouncing slightly in excitement. Her happiness made my heart feel warm. My guess was that she must have been recorded herself, played the dress-up game with a webcam. At first, she was simply moving her finger across the trackpad, clicking then giggling excitingly for a bit. She must have been laughing at the thing she put on herself in the game. After about 2 minutes or so, the screen would cut to black for a fraction of a second and then return to the girl playing the game. This time, however, she was dressed differently, in a simple pink t-shirt with the words Go Go Girl stitched in glitter. I guess the game was recording her every time she started without her knowing. That made me sort of uneasy. I mean, why would anyone program a game to do that? Whatever. I guessed it was going to be the same sort of thing over and over with the video, so I might as well turn off the computer. I reached over and pressed the power button, and it didn't shut off this time. The video continued to play, and I saw the girl this time was wearing an orange tank top with nothing on it. She was smiling and giggling as usual, and I thought maybe I could turn off the computer after the video is done. It couldn't be that long. The video seemed to drag on, with more cuts of her playing the game in a different outfit, and I started to doze off. However, after the next cut in the video, the girl was just staring at the camera with an expressionless look on her face, wondering what the hell was going on. I became interested in the video again. This one didn't make me smile. It made me extremely uneasy to watch her without her usual smiley face on. It was dark in the room, but there was one desk light on at the side. She was in some sort of nightwear. What was she going to do? She sat there for a minute with that blank expression, like she wasn't thinking at all. I started to get really tense, as if something awful was about to happen. She bent over and picked up a handsaw from the left side of where she was sitting. She held it in front of her, showing it to the camera. Then she placed the jagged blade on the side of her cheek. I cringed at what I was seeing. Slowly she began slicing into her right cheek, blood drizzling down her neck as she did it. Slowly the side of her teeth began to show after about 10 seconds. As the saw went lower on her face, more of her teeth began to show on the side. Blood covered almost the entire right side of her face. She eventually got to the bottom of her jawbone and sawed a teeny piece of it too. Her cheek fell to the ground with a small thud, and she put the saw in her lap and continued to stare at the camera, emotionless. I couldn't take much more of this and tore the battery out of the laptop, but the video continued to play. Then the next cut began. The girl screamed in extreme pain. I almost fell out of my seat. It was so loud. She screamed and put her hands over her now absent cheek. She continued to scream in agony for about 10 seconds. Then a knocking was heard from the side. It was a woman, yelling in a language I couldn't understand. She was pounding the door, but not opening it. The girl must have locked it. I tried to unplug the monitor from the laptop, but it was stuck in. I didn't want to see what happened next. The screaming and the yelling continued up until the next cut. She was back in her emotionless state again, but her cheek was still missing. The woman at the door was pounding and yelling still. It must have been her mother. The girl then raised the saw up to her right shoulder and began cutting just as slowly as last time. I gagged at the sight of this. It was a holocaust of wrong. The blood began to stream out in all directions. The yelling behind the door fell silent. I guessed the other woman was trying to get someone to help her, either the father or brother or whatnot. When she hit the bone, an awful grinding noise could be heard. I covered my ears, but I still could hear it vividly through my hands. I noticed that a piece of her muscle got stuck on one of the steel teeth of the saw. This cut ended a lot faster than before, and the next cut was the same thing except the color from her face was draining, and her pain-ridden screams became quickly weaker. Her clothing was completely red with blood on the right side. Then she became emotionless again. Oh God, what is she going to cut off next? The mother returned with what sounded like two other people, and they were all yelling in the same language as before. She raised the saw and began cutting the right side of her head off. Loud thuds were sounding at the door. They were trying to knock it down. She continued to work her way down, with blood going in all sorts of directions. The thuds still repeated themselves on the door. I was mostly confused as how she kept going, even after she went through her brain with the saw. Her right eye rolled into the back of her head. Blood began leaking out of it. She eventually made it to the top of her mouth, where she hacked her way through bones and teeth. It was the single worst sound I have ever heard in my entire life. I still hear it in the back of my head some days. The thuds continued, and deep in the back of my mind I hoped they wouldn't be able to break the door down so they wouldn't have seen such an awful sight. She finally made it through, and with that, the right side of her head fell to the side of her neck, held on only by a piece of skin. I remember the chilling sound of the jaw being unhinged when it was tugged violently by the force of the top half of her head. She put the saw down to her side. The cut ended, and in the next cut, she simply fell face down on the desk. Half her brain fell out onto the desk on impact, and her eye popped out of its socket. Blood pooled on the desk. The people trying to break the door finally made it in, and they were hysterical at what they saw. Their daughter was in pieces. The mother vomited and ran out of the room. The father ran to the daughter, put her head back together and cried, holding her at the side of his. The other man, presumably the girl's older brother, simply stared in horror at what he saw. The horrifying self-mutilation finished with that cut, and the scream cut back to the empty room with the bed. With a sigh of relief that it was over, I sat there, breathing heavily and sweating. I didn't realize that the room was so hot until now. I had so many questions to ask. How was all of this possible? It frightened me, and I spent a good 30 minutes sitting in the chair, and finally I got the courage to get up. I looked back at the laptop for what I hoped was the last time. The room with the bed glared on the screen. Then it cut to something else. It was a cut of my face in the basement using the laptop.